isn't the act of dying that we fear, but rather being a creature for whom death is inexorable. My problem? Well, what should I do today? Because I have about 18,000 of these left, but that is only if I don't find myself the victim of a lethal crime, or slip on ice and fall against my head in such a way that turns my consciousness off. So I either have about 18,000 of these days left, or this could actually be my last day. And I don't know what to do with that information. There is a stretch of the White River that passes a cemetery where they've buried war generals and state governors. I walk this river every morning as I contemplate what I should do with the day ahead. When I pass this cemetery, I imagine myself buried in one of the graves. The cemetery triggers the thought, but in my imagination, there is no specificity. My grave could be there, or any other patch of dirt. In these morning daydreams, I see my body buried underground without a casket, yet I am outside of my body. Time speeds up as I watch my corpse decompose. That is what I am oh so curious about. What is that is decomposing? Is that me? Am I my body or something else? I don't understand. If the cells in my body are vibrating and wiggling now, yet they will be eaten by worms, and the worms will travel with the pieces of me they've consumed, and then they themselves will die somewhere else, then who am I? Truthfully, this vision of worms scattering my body throughout the earth caused me to write a letter to whom it may concern, requesting that I may be buried in a casket in the event of my untimely demise. It was only when I realized the wooden casket would dissolve into the dirt as well that I tore the letter up. For me, this crisis unraveled almost a year ago. I had been engaging in a series of romantic rendezvous with a woman who wasn't my wife. She was in a relationship with another man, but I felt no guilt. In fact, I felt empowered. My actions allowed me to see myself as a king of the masculine hierarchy. Our interactions seemed forbidden, and we had to move in the shadows, which made it even more fun. However, one night I was driving to pick her up when I received a phone call from one of my best friends, Thomas. He is clearly distraught but trying to stay composed as he tells me that he is uncertain what to do. In my confusion, I ask him to elaborate as to what he is uncertain about. He doesn't tell me much, rather, he says he is at the hospital and asks if I can come and see him. Concerned, I ask if he's been in an accident, or why is he at the hospital? He lets me know he wasn't in an accident and he is okay for now, but that he'll be in the hospital for a few more days. Given that I had work the next day, and the hospital he was at is on the other side of town, we decide that I'll visit him Friday morning, 4 days from now. Friday comes and I'm so overwhelmed with work that I don't make it to the hospital. However, I do arrive Saturday morning a little after sunrise. The nurse working the front desk is very kind, and she begins cheerfully tapping away at her keyboard when I ask her where I can find Thomas. She clicks enter, then stares at the computer screen, and I notice the cheerful expression vanish from her face. There is no saccade in her eyes, so I know that she isn't reading, rather, she is staring at one thing. Several moments pass of her saying nothing, which causes me to fidget my gaze around the rest of the lobby. In my fidgeting, she snaps back like she's woken up and calls over another nurse. Standing up in her chair so that she can be heard in a whisper, the two nurses begin to speak inaudibly to each other. I deliberately lean my head towards them so as to remind them I'm still here, and I'm still requesting information. The first nurse sits back down in her chair, and the second nurse asks me to follow her. She begins leading me to a room where Thomas is staying, so I assume. To my surprise, she brings me to an empty waiting room with 7 chairs and a coffee machine. She informs me that Thomas has been diagnosed with congenital heart disease earlier that week. The doctor's prognosis gave Thomas less than a year to live. The nurse's words shatter my reality. I didn't realize any of this. Thank you for letting me know, I tell her. I want to be there for him. Can I visit him in his room now? She sighs through her nose and says, "Treatment for Thomas would be very expensive. This heart surgery could be solved, but through an incredibly risky and costly surgery. A surgery that could only be completed if a donor were to become available. And Thomas didn't have insurance. I think he was a contractor." She informs me. Okay. I stay, unsure of what else to say. And now time is slowing down. Everything is melding like a Salvador Dali painting. And also like a Dali painting, I can't comprehend what is going on here. The nurse continues. On Tuesday evening, he signed a voluntary request to undergo medical assistance in dying. That procedure was carried out last night at 9 p.m. Thomas isn't alive? I ask. She confirms, and I walk out of the waiting room, then out of the hospital, without saying anything to anyone. I don't leave in haste or anger. Rather, I say nothing because there's nothing to be said. It's over. Anything that could have been said should have already been said, yet I didn't say it, and now it's too late. In the hours and days after I learn of his passing, I become saturated with a sense of guilt that begins to evolve into a self-hatred. I had a responsibility as his friend, and I shrugged off that responsibility in favor of my own selfish, disgusting, and inverted desires. I gave up the final opportunity to see him because of stress towards work, a stress that I now see as trivial. In contention with constant psychological pain that is like flames burning my soul, I try to tell myself a story to soothe my wounds. When the guilt and sorrow become too burdensome, I remind myself of the worms eating my organs, the triviality of existence, and the imminent heat death of the universe. But the words and thoughts are also empty. Like a naive child who'd been told not to touch the stovetop, I touched it because I didn't believe, or maybe I just wanted to see for myself. Now I have been burned, and the pain is too sharp to ever forget the brevity of life again. I want nothing more than to see my friend, tell him I love him, and I'm so grateful to have him as a friend, and that I'm sorry. Why do we fear dying? Why do we fear dying? Of course, the most relevant question that must first be answered is what is death? What does it mean to die? And that there's so many different perspectives on death. And one of the perspectives is death is uncertain. We don't know what exists after we were to die. And so some people don't look at death. They don't conceptualize their own death. They don't contemplate their own mortality. They don't think about what it means because they see death as something that is ununderstandable. You cannot understand it. And so you're alive right now, and death is like a dark cave. And to explore it abstractly or deliberately and intentionally would be to waste the gift of life that you have right now. You could spend your entire life contemplating what it means to die and what death means. And the risk is that it could, like I'm mentioning in this story, I've got 18,000 days left. I could spend all 18,000 of my remaining days thinking about it. And some people realize that, so they choose not to explore that cave. They choose not to explore that cave because they believe there's no value. There's no value in that darkness. And it is dark. It's dark and it's unknown. So not only is there no gold to be found in there, but it's dark and unknown. And some people view death as a portal to eternal life, and that this world of which we currently exist is saturated, placated with despair, and hamartia, missing the mark, sin. And because this world and this current existence has within it death, a requirement that you must die, they view death as a portal to the next realm, to something like an eternal life. And you could say that is the exact opposite of that first perspective of literally just never thinking about what it means to die. And what they're doing is they're discounting this life that they certainly have. And they're waiting for the end. All of the gold that they could possibly imagine exists at the end. And then there's so many other perspectives as well, of course, of getting clever. And people look at birth and they're like, somebody who's born in, say, 1940, and now they're 84 years old. You could look at that individual, and maybe that individual would even say that before 1940, I'd been dead for billions of years. I was dead for billions of years. So if once I reach my demise, I will go back to that place from which I came. And to view death in that way is like a coming out and going back into existence. So what is death? What is death actually? We've got these perspectives, and that last one is what I would say the one that people try to get clever, and they try to describe exactly what it means to die. And they assume that they were in that place of death before they were born, and they're going to go back to that place of death. But what is death really? What is death objectively? That last perspective doesn't have destruction. It's a coming out of and going back into existence, but it doesn't see death as destruction. So, in life, there are times when we must let go of the lesser parts of ourselves. We are not the most perfect version of ourselves. And when a situation like what I'm describing in this story occurs, it's so sobering and so cataclysmic. That's why I use the word shattering to your reality, that it changes everything. And for the character in this story, the narrator, he was selfishly following his own lustful desires with this woman who he's engaging in these romantic rendezvous with. And he delegated that to be more important than visiting his friend in the hospital. He didn't do it urgently. He didn't go visit the friend urgently. He was going to wait until Friday. And then Friday came, and not only did he not visit him on Friday, he didn't do it because he was stressed out from trivialities of work, things that don't even matter. And when a situation like that occurs, you have an opportunity to change. You have an opportunity to change, but not only is it an opportunity to change is the only possibility of redemption. If you're unwilling to change, it'd be like somebody touching the stovetop, a naive child touching the stovetop, then being burned, and then walking away from that stovetop with a burn on their finger, and then questioning like, well, I don't think I actually got burned right there. I don't know if that was actually as bad as I thought it was in the moment. I don't even know if that stove was hot. Maybe I should go touch that stove again. And for the person that doesn't learn lessons, that continues to touch the stove, it's as though they're identifying with the lesser versions of themselves. They're letting the weaker aspects of their nature prevail over the better parts of themselves. So you have an option. You have an option to learn and change. And it's a crossroads because what you could do, like in the midst of this story, there's two pathways. You could understand, the first pathway is that you could understand where you went wrong, your selfishness, your lustful desires, your improper value judgments, meaning you were placing the rendezvous, the lustful desires above friendship. And then when the friend is gone, you realize the extent of which that was the wrong decision. So you can make a change at that point and realize that I'm never going to take anyone for granted again, and I'm never going to leave anything unsaid, and I'm going to tell people the way that I feel, and I'm going to give them love in every present moment, and I'm going to cherish the people in my life, and I'm not going to find myself back in this predicament. So that is one situation. That is one decision that you could make. And if you make that decision, then what happens there is that you were that lustful person, but you've chosen to burn off those lustful parts of you, those selfish parts of you. And the burning off of those selfish parts, the letting go of them, is the act of letting them die. So something has to die. Something is going to have to die. It'll either be the lesser versions of yourself or the second pathway, which is to be burned by the stovetop and choose to touch the stove again and to say, well, my friend went down that pathway, but worms eating brains and the imminent heat death of the universe, and none of this really matters, and I should just continue pursuing my lustful desires. I should continue living life the way that I want to live in the present moment and pursuing immediate gratification. And if you make that decision, then you come to identify, you see yourself as those lesser versions of yourself. And if you put yourself in that vessel, then it is you that would have to die. You are identifying with vice. Vice is not good. You're not identifying with what is good. You are identifying with the inversion of what is good. So, what is death? Death is destruction. Death is destruction, and you get shattered into oblivion because those pieces of you that are lesser parts, they can't survive. They can't continue going forward through time. And you can make the decision to let those lesser parts of you die, or you can identify with the weaker parts of yourself, be afraid of letting go, be afraid of willingly throwing parts of yourself into the fire. And that is death. Death is going to come regardless. But where will you be when death comes? Will you be in the vessel that is redemption? Because if you let the lesser parts of yourself burn off, then you're not actually dying. It's not you that's dying. It is those aspects of your nature. And in that situation, death doesn't even exist anymore. What exists is resurrection. And in the inverse of that, if you hold on to those lesser parts of you, then what exists for you isn't resurrection. Resurrection doesn't exist. What exists is only death and destruction. So why must we die? Why must we die? There's a scene in The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis where in this book, the narrator goes from he's existing within hell, and then he goes into heaven. He goes from hell and into heaven, and it's a dream, and he's observing both places. And when he makes it up to heaven, he's observing other individuals who have come from hell up to heaven, and they are greeted by loved ones. They are greeted by people who care about them in life, and the people who they are greeted by have become solidified in heaven. They've asked for forgiveness. They've let go of all of the lesser parts. They've become apathetic to even their own flaws that they brought forth into reality while they were living on earth. They've let go of everything. They are only about forgiveness. But then you've got these people who are coming from hell, and they meet these solidified angelic creatures, beings, humans who have died, who have become angelic. And the angelic figures try to get them to follow that same path of repentance and let go and forgive. And there's a scene where a woman comes up to her husband, and the woman is with basically a parade of animals. There's light is shining on her, light is illuminating from her, and the first thing that she says to her husband when he makes it into heaven is that she's sorry. She's sorry for everything that she's ever done wrong by him, and she just asks that he would forgive her. And his response is to nag her. He isn't willing to forgive her. He keeps bringing up things that she did on earth. He keeps victimizing himself like he's a victim, and he's unwilling to let go. And she just keeps telling him, she's like, don't you realize none of that matters anymore? You just have to let go. But he's continuously unwilling to let go. And then you realize as the scene continues, he's carrying a chain. He's really, really small person, carrying a chain of the bigger person. A chained up bigger person. And the bigger person is the man's true self. But he's got a small version of himself carrying him around with a chain, and the bigger person isn't speaking. The person carrying the chain is speaking, and the woman is just trying to get the attention of the bigger one, the true self. But as the conversation goes forward, and he continuously doesn't forgive her. There is a moment where he begins to forgive her, and then the individual holding the chain starts to shrink and become smaller. But it ends with him not being willing to forgive her, and the the true self that is chained up begins to shrink, and it becomes so small that it just disappears, and both of them disappear because they were unwilling to let go of the victimization that they felt. They felt that they'd put in so much work and they were so deserving, and even though the woman was doing what he preferred, which is asking him for forgiveness, he wouldn't let go. He wouldn't be willing to. He wasn't willing to let the lesser parts of himself burn off. The small version of himself, the weak version of himself, carrying a chain has him in a psychological prison. He has himself in his own psychological prison, but he doesn't want to remove the chain. He doesn't want to get rid of that victim mentality. So he shrinks and he dissolves, and the woman goes about her way. She's sad that he couldn't make it into heaven, but she goes about her day. So I say that because the question of why must we die? Why must we die? Death is the wages of sin. We are inadequate. Every person has things about them that are full of vice, inadequate, insufficient, but they could be the best version of themselves, but the best version of themselves is small. It's like a seed, a mustard seed. It's like 0.1% of their entire being, and 99.9% of them is insufficient and needs to be burned off. But there's so much of them that needs to be burned off. And I believe that is why we fear death. Because in order to, we find joy in life. We certainly find joy in life, and there's a lot of desperation, desperate times, misery, evil, malevolence. There's a bunch of horrific things about this existence, but there's also so much joy and love in it as well. And we want to take advantage of this gift, and there's so much of us that need to burn off that it seems like all parts of us will have to burn off. And there will be nothing left. And we are granted this gift of life, but because 99.9% of us is insufficient, if we begin this process of letting go and dying, we fear that there might not be anything left, and we will fade into oblivion. We'll be scattered into infinite pieces, nevermore. We will exist no longer. But there's a paradox. And the paradox is that there is something in you, and that is your true self. And that true self is very small. It's the size of a mustard seed. But out of that mustard seed, everything can grow. Your true self could grow if you would focus on just that, what is good, and only water what is good, and get rid of the extra, even though 99.9% of it is extra. If you would just focus on watering that mustard seed, then all gold, all honey, all life would exist on the other side of that. And the paradox is that in order to live truly, in order to live, you must first be willing to die.